If you have ever hooked up an old game system to a modern flat panel television, you've probably noticed it looks dreadful. Thankfully, it doesn't have to be this way. Japanese company Micomsoft has quietly been manufacturing video processors aimed at the retro gaming enthusiast for the past decade. Micomsoft's latest model, nearing 2 years old now, is the XRGB-mini FrameMeister. I've spoken very highly of this device since purchasing one back in December of 2012. I've used this video processor with a dozen game systems using a variety of connections, and I finally feel confident in reviewing this device. The XRGB-mini is a video processor. It takes the analog signal from your old systems like composite, S-video, component, and RGB and converts the analog output to digital, and upscales the low-resolution image into something your television can handle while retaining a pixel-perfect representation of the original game. While your flat panel probably has inputs for composite video, and maybe even S-video if you're lucky, it will likely do a terrible job of taking that video signal and displaying it. The XRGB-mini is a dedicated processor built for the sole purpose of presenting your old games in a pristine manner. What sets the XRGB-mini apart from general video processors is in the handling of 240p content. Most televisions' processors interpret the output of old gaming systems as 480i, which causes interlacing artifacts and generally results in a muddy, blurry picture. The XRGB-mini can handle the 240p content correctly as a progressive image, which is half the battle in properly showcasing old games. From here, it scales the content without trying to artificially smooth the content. The result is a pixel-perfect image with an emulator-like quality. The XRGB-mini has a plethora of inputs on it, including 2 HDMI, 1 D terminal, 1 composite, 1 S-video, and 1 RGB. VGA is sadly missing, which would be nice for the Sega Dreamcast. Included in the box is a mini DIN to JP21 SCART adapter for connecting JP21 SCART cables to the XRGB-mini. It's the Japanese standard though, so be sure you are buying the correct cable standard before purchasing SCART cables for all your old systems. I've purchased a few cables from the UK-based retrogamingcable.co.uk, and I recommend them. RGB is the holy grail of analog signals when it comes to classic game systems. The red, green, blue, and sync signals are all on separate lines, and the result is a perfect image without any color bleeding, rainbowing, or shimmering effects. Americans used to a diet of composite video are in for a treat. The Neo Geo looks pixel perfect without any noticeable issues at all. If you are looking to show off your new XRGB purchase, this is a good place to start. The Sega Genesis, on the other hand, has given me some problems. The issues are related to the console itself and not the XRGB-mini. I was not able to use my Sega CDX as the Mini would lose sync and black out periodically. Adding a 32X into the equation did help quite a bit, nearly eliminating the sync issues. The 32X in general is a great video filter, and I recommend always having one hooked up to your Genesis. However, I still had a problem with vertical banding. Areas of blue or brown had a noticeable pin stripping effect that isn't actually present in the game. I assume this could be resolved by replacing a resistor or cap somewhere on the Genesis's motherboard to reduce some electrical signal somewhere. I also tried out the Sega Nomad. Surprisingly, the Nomad performed nearly perfectly. I was left with a pixel-perfect image. The Super Nintendo and Atari Jaguar both have S-video cables available and natively output the format. S-video splits the chroma and luminescence into 2 separate lines. While not as good as RGB, it offers an excellent picture quality. S-video is generally a big step up from composite video. As you can see in the footage, there is still some minor color bleeding. Atari Jaguar performance is nearly identical to the SNES. It's quite good. Just note the official Jaguar S-video cable can be very expensive to acquire. I paid $35 for mine a decade ago, and it goes for far more today. Moving on to the next generation of systems, we have the PlayStation and Saturn. Both of these systems offer S-video output. The PlayStation uses the same cable as the PlayStation 2, so again, finding quality S-video cables is rather easy. What is interesting, however, is that these are the first consoles to feature games running at full 480i, 640 by 480 interlaced. The Nintendo 64 did as well, but I do not own any 480i and 64 titles. I'm not sure how many games of this generation support this video mode, but in my personal collection, I have pinball games for both systems that run in 480i. These are 2D affairs with no screen scrolling. I suspect there are few games that can actually run in this resolution with the limited amount of RAM available. The XRGB-mini performs flawlessly with this generation of systems. I'm not quite sure how the XRGB-mini can take two interlaced fields, combine them into one, while still maintaining 60 frames per second, and have no perceptible input lag. It honestly does not make any sense, but it does perform flawlessly. I noticed some minor interlacing artifacts with the pinball movement in Digital Pinball, Last Gladiators, but generally speaking, it's breathtaking. It's amazing to think these 20-year-old systems were capable of this kind of resolution, and the XRGB-mini shows off all that detail. Along with the Mini, I purchased a component to D-terminal cable so I could connect my component devices to the Mini. This includes my PSP, Xbox, and GameCube. I had actually never heard of this connector before owning the XRGB-mini. From my understanding, it's a Japanese standard that never got traction anywhere else. The XRGB-mini has performed okay with 480p sources over component. The image tends to be a bit soft, not producing that pixel-perfect look. As we can see here on OutRun 2 for the original Xbox, it's not quite razor sharp. Curiously, the Mini has two HDMI inputs. I initially thought this would be a useless feature, but I am now glad it has them. I use a simple converter to take the Dreamcast VGA signal and convert it to HDMI. I feed this into the XRGB-mini and then let it upscale the signal to 720p, and the results are fantastic. It produces a pixel-perfect image without trying to smooth the edges during the up conversion. It also does it without producing any noticeable lag. The only output option is HDMI, and it supports 480i in P, 720p, and 1080i in P. There is a menu option to enable DVI resolutions, which gives you PC monitor resolutions of 1024 by 768, 1360 by 768, and 1920 by 1200. There isn't much to say here, I had no issues. It's also worth noting the XRGB-mini can handle 50Hz sources, as well as inputting and outputting in 50Hz. I also learned that my TV accepts 50Hz sources over HDMI. Very odd. The FrameMeister in the product name refers to the scanline generator software built into the XRGB-mini. Back in the late 90s and early 2000s, I played a lot of games on emulators, and always hated the scanline features available in the emulation software. However, when sitting back and playing in front of a television, I found them to be amazing. In fact, when I'm not recording video footage, I always have the scanlines enabled. They truly give the feel of an old CRT monitor and even hide some of the vertical banding issues I mentioned earlier. You really have to experience it to believe it. The great feature of the Mini is that the firmware can be updated. Since owning this, updates have been released to support PAL resolutions and refresh rates, along with expanded support with scanlines. More importantly, English updates have been released as well, allowing you to navigate all of the menus in our native tongue, rather than Japanese. Despite being a high-priced device, the XRGB-mini feels very light and the plastic feels cheap and shiny, rather than rich and dense. To be fair, it has performed flawless for me, but it certainly doesn't look or feel as expensive as it is. The remote has a similar cheap look and feel, but again, the performance has been flawless. Value is the $300 question. Should you buy one? I'll preface this to say the list price at the end of 2012 was around $500, including EMS shipping from Japan. Even at that price point, I found it to be worth every penny. I'm finding that I am enjoying older games significantly more in their pristine quality on a large flat screen, rather than via my trusty old tube TV. It even made me want to go back and revisit a lot of older titles, just to see what I may have missed. A lot of Genesis games use a lot of dithering due to the system's limited color palette. Dithering is also used for fake transparency effects. I found I appreciated a lot of Genesis titles significantly more when I could view all of the individual pixels. Be warned, the cost of entry is more than the price of the XRGB-mini itself. You'll need to track down quality S-video cables, import Japanese SCART cables, or buy Japanese to European SCART adapters, and sometimes buy video converters to get everything hooked up right. Generally speaking, I have found the ownership very rewarding. I am a bit of an AV geek as well, and I love tinkering around with cables and settings, chasing the perfect setup. While ownership is mostly a plug-and-play affair, be aware of what you're getting into. If you thought this video was exhausted, I'm barely scratching the surface at what there is to learn about video formats, and still have much to learn. If all of this sounds appealing to you, I absolutely recommend the XRGB-mini. The Micomsoft video processors tend to depreciate quite slow as well. So if you decide this device isn't worth it, you should be able to make most of your money back if you sell it. For me, the XRGB-mini is an amazing device and has really elevated my appreciation and passion for retro gaming. What more could you ask for?